Well, good afternoon, church. It is so good to be here with you today on this Palm Sunday that we celebrate our King, and I'm looking forward to celebrating our King over the next few days in this Holy Week with you. We are going to be talking about the discipline of worship today, and you might not know, but this is actually our last sermon on the spiritual disciplines. We've spent 10 weeks now in this topic, in this sermon series, talking about different disciplines that we can practice in our life that lead us to a Godward-oriented life towards God. It leads to godliness. And preparing for this sermon, it was interesting because oftentimes when I think of worship as more of an overarching thing that we carry out in our life, right? So if you're familiar with Romans 12:1, this says that our bodies are a living sacrifice. This is our spiritual form of worship. So everything that we do in our lives is worship to God. So going over all of these spiritual disciplines that we've talked about so far, we've talked about Bible intake, about fasting, prayer, solitude, fellowship, stewardship, discipleship, purity, and confession. A lot of different actions and habits that we can have in our life. All of these, in some general sense, is our living sacrifice. It is our spiritual form of worship to God. We worship God by reading our Bibles. We worship God by praying. We worship God through fellowship and through a pure lifestyle. This is all our worship to God. But when we consider what is it that makes worship a discipline, we've talked about these disciplines more in a specific manner. These disciplines are practices or habits that we can carry out in our life that build us up and strengthen us. These are something that we must approach strategically and intentionally to carry. I enjoy music. I've led music a few times here. I actually enjoyed music so much as a teenager that I chose to go and study at university music, not knowing at the time that the term starving artist was very legitimate and it wouldn't be an industry that would make me a lot of money. But nonetheless, I went and studied music. I really enjoyed it. But my first year of university, I had an experience that kind of took my appreciation of music and understanding of music beyond what I had understood it to be before. At the end of every year, we have these things called juries. They are the performance equivalent of a final exam, where you prepare a solo piece, you go before all of your professors, and you perform this piece from memory. And it's quite stressful. It's thrown right in there with all of the written exams. So preparing for this, I did everything I could to prepare, but I had kind of the perfect storm leading up to this jury, my first jury, that kind of emotionally wrecked me. I had some bureaucratic issues I was dealing with, going to the courthouse to take care of things financially. I had an unexpected funeral that I had to attend a few days prior to my first jury. And then, of course, 2 weeks of studying and taking exams, all of this to say, I found myself right before this jury completely emotionally wrecked and stressed and really just shaking and trembling from the stress that I was experiencing going into this. So I was praying for God just to calm me down and to give me the focus that I needed here. And I resolved in that moment, I'm going to try this thing where I just take all of the raw emotion, all of this negative emotion that I have, and I'm going to express myself through this solo. This 15 minutes, I'm just going to take all of this, I'm going to express it through this art that God has given me. So I did that, and 15 minutes later, I was looking back on what I still would say is probably one of the best performances of my life, not because I hit every single note, but because I felt so able to express myself through this piece of music. And I was looking back on this, realizing that music was far more than just notes on a page. It was far more than notes that I played on my horn or notes that I sang, words that I sang. Music is something that I have been given to be able to express emotions and beliefs that are far deeper and cannot be communicated by words. I started to see music in this light, and along with that, I think we can see many different forms of art in this light too. If you consider yourself an artist of any type, I think you can relate to this. We see people expressing their emotion in painting or drawing, people expressing their emotion in literature and writing and poetry. I would even consider baking and knitting forms of art that you can express yourself in. And you might be sitting here saying, Patrick, I am not an artist. I have tried drawing before, and it looks like a stick figure on a page. And that might be the case, but I think even there is a form of artistic creativity in our everyday jobs. If you're a teacher, there is a form of creatively expressing yourself in your profession. If you are a computer programmer, there is a way of expressing your excellence and carrying out your task excellently that is a form of art. And why I talk about all of this art to start us off, we're going to be talking a lot about God's, the attributes of creativity that God has given us today. For me, I have experienced that mainly through music. I believe that all of us have experienced that here to some extent. So I just want you to name that in your mind right now. What way do you express yourself creatively? Creatively? Which way do you express yourself creatively? And hold on to that, and then we're going to look today at how we can use those things to glorify God, why those are God-given, and why they can, or how they can be used as acts of worship. And we've been given the ability to create, and through our creativity, we express our emotions, beliefs, and values that go way deeper than simple communication. So we're going to look at 3 attributes specifically. If you've heard a sermon from Patrick before, you know that he likes his 3-point sermons, so here are my 3 points. We're going to look at 3 attributes that God has given us in his creativity, the first of which is our God-given creative nature. You can probably quote Genesis 1:1 to me, but the very first verb that is used in the Bible is create. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Creation and creating, the act of creating, plays a huge role from the beginning, and we see that in God. We see that in the creation narrative, of course. But whenever we consider God, he has many, many titles. He's the Redeemer, he's the Savior, he's all-knowing, he's all-present. He is all of these things. The very first title that we give him, though, in Genesis 1 is that he is Creator. We are created from a God who is Creator. And more than that, we read in Genesis 1:26 this. We read that God said, "Let us make man in our own image." He created us man and woman in his own image. So we are all image bearers of the image of God, and we carry to some extent his characteristics, his actions, and his way of thinking, and his feelings. I read in one book earlier this week that if God were a symphony, we would be transcribed as a sonnet, right? So God might be this complex, hour-long symphony with many instruments, many movements. There is so much to learn about God, but he chose to make us in his image. So we aren't necessarily as grandiose as God in a full symphony, but we might be that one line of a sonnet that is reflective of that symphony, right? You hear that sonnet and you think, oh, that comes from this other larger piece of music. You look at a human being, we should be able to see that each one of us are created in the image of our Creator. And since he is such a creator, that was his first title. We are creative creatures, right? We are little creators in a way. I think that's one of the first things that he imprinted on us in our image, is that we are creative creatures. We often joke about you don't have to teach a child to be selfish or to sin. And you might see a little 2-year-old, as adorable and as wonderful as they are, they steal things, they want things, they cry, and from what I've heard, they make messes. Thankfully, haven't experienced that myself. But what's also cool is you don't have to teach a child how to create. right? You put a child down and you give them craft supplies and give them an hour, and before you know it, they're coming and handing you a drawing of something that they saw, or a drawing of something that they haven't seen and they've created out of nothing, out of imagination, right? This is not taught. You can't teach a child exactly what to draw. You might teach them how to draw it and how to be more creative. But even from the beginning, we have this creativity imprinted on us. And I think that's so cool whenever you're handed from your child a drawing. What you're seeing is God's image shine through them, right? As a little creature of creation, a creative creature. And then we experience that ourselves, whether it's with work or whether it's with art or whatever way. Whenever we work on something for a long time and we take a step back and look at our creation, there is a sense of accomplishment and success that we can gather from that, right? Just imagine how great that was on the seventh day of creation when God was able to step back and see what he created and say, this is good, right? So in the same way, we can look at things that we have created because we're creative nature. We are creatures of creative nature. We can step back and find accomplishment in that and success in that. So we have a God-given creative nature. This is a first attribute of creativity that we see. Secondly, we have a God-given creative ability, right? We don't have to look far to see human creativity. So if you look through human history, we started in a garden. We came into villages, and the technology and the innovation and systems and society and art and culture, all of these things have grown to the point that we see them today from living in a garden, right? Or even just looking 1,000 years ago. What we live in today is a product of humanity's creative ability. And we see that reflected a few verses later. We read Genesis 1:26, but in Genesis 1:28, God's first blessing to us, his first command, was to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, right? To take this on and be creative to fill it, right? So we look around, and I don't want to look at society and the things that humanity has succeeded at and say humanity deserves glory, but rather I want to glorify the God who empowered humanity to even carry these things out, right? God has given us these abilities, and we can clearly see that humans aren't the recipient of this glory because humans can also really mess up creativity, right? You can, because of sin in our life, because we have departed from God's original plan for us, our creativity can also serve to be evil and serve to hurt the world around us, right? So in no way are we glorifying humans' creative ability, but just the fact that what we see is a result of God even empowering us with the ability to see something and to make something out of it, to see something and to make something more out of it, right? And we see that every day in our lives. Furthermore, the source of our creativity is God. We see a few different points throughout the Bible where creativity and art is expressed. I think one of the first, but one of the most extensive examples of this is in the tabernacle, right? If you've read through Exodus, you've read through the probably 10 chapters of all of the details of what the tabernacle should be. You've struggled through that. And then 10 chapters later, it's how the Israelites carried that out to the T, carrying out every single bit of the commands that God had given them for the tabernacle. But if you look at some of these details that are expressed in the tabernacle, they are very artistic and very expressive in their ways. So we look in Exodus 35, and I believe I have a few of the verses from there, but I'm going to read verses 30 through 35 here. If you want to turn there, this is Exodus 35. This is God giving commands to Moses and how he ought to carry this out, and not only carry it out himself, but how God has gifted the people with the creative ability to carry this out. Moses said to the people, "See, the Lord has called by name Bezalel and the son of Uri, and the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with the skill and intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stone, for setting, in crafting wood, and for every skill crafted. And he was inspired to teach both him and, I'm going to ruin this name, Oholiab, the son of Ahishamash, in the tribe of Dan. He has filled him with the skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver, or by a designer, or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer. So what we see here is God has given us two things in our creativity. He has given us two things in the art or the trade or the profession that we are carrying out. He has first given us his Spirit. He has empowered us with a God-glorifying creativity, right? We see that in verse 31. He has filled him with the Spirit of God, and along with that, he has filled him with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with craftsmanship, right? This isn't only talking about drawing a picture, right, or playing a piece of music. This is talking about the skills that we're given to carry out the task that God has called us to. Whether you are a computer programmer, a teacher, a nurse, whatever you might be, God has filled you with the Spirit to be able to carry that out. Secondly, we see in verse 35 that he has filled us with and he has given us different and unique skills necessary to carry those things out. I think it's such an encouragement that we can look at each person here and we're each given a different skill, right? We each are skilled in different ways. There are things that I am very much not skilled in, and I don't even try. But there are other things that I realize, wow, God has given me some talent in this, and I can really enjoy that, and I can use that to reflect it back on him. He's done that with each one of you here today. So we see God-given creative ability through human history. We see that the source of it is from God himself, not only because we are created in his nature, but we are filled with his Spirit. We are given those skills that he has given. We are given those skills to carry out in a God-glorifying manner. And then thirdly, what I want to look at here is our God-given creative purpose. So we have a God-given creative nature and a God-given creative ability. And this purpose, what do we use this for? We see something interesting here as I was researching. The author of Ecclesiastes, if you've read Ecclesiastes, you know the phrase that comes up over and over again is vanity of vanities. All is vanity, right? Everything that we see here it's not going to fulfill us. Anything that I can put my hands on, whether it's money or possessions or materials, those are not going to fulfill me. And this is reflected later in the Sermon on the Mount whenever God says, lay your treasures up in heaven, for on earth moth and rust destroy, but in heaven these are eternal things that we can invest in for eternity. So looking at this in Ecclesiastes 2, 4 through 11, we read this, and I think I just put verse 11 up on the screen, but I'll read just a few of the things leading up to that. He's saying this, he said, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made for myself pools from which to water the forest and grow trees. Now, I don't think any of you here have created massive mansions and gardens and pools and all of these things, but what we do have is we can look on the products of our life and say, look what I've done. Look what I've done for my life in the job that I've built. Look what I've done in the house that I've built. Look what I've done in the family that I've built. But those are things that God has given us, right? If we see those things for our purpose to serve ourselves, this is where things start to fall apart. We need to see these things as given to us by God in order to reflect the glory back on him. And we see this reflected later. I'm skipping over 3 or 4 verses there, but he's talking about just all of the success that he found in work and relationships and all of these things. And then he concludes this. He says, "Then I consider all that my hands had done and the toil that I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun." So creative for its own sake might be valuable for this time. You might be able to enjoy that garden or that park. He probably enjoyed those to some extent temporarily, but looking at an eternal perspective, we start to see that those things are vain. Those things will pass away. So then the question becomes, where should our creativity be focused? We've asked where other things should be focused, and of course they should be focused towards God. This is a lifestyle of worship. But with our creativity, where should our creativity be focused? And I want to point out today that our creativity should be focused back to God, right? Your art or your trade or your profession is only fully appreciated and realized whenever it is used and directed towards God. Just a few verses that we can read that reflect this sentiment. Psalm 96:1, "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth." Psalm 33, verses 2 and 3, "Give thanks to the Lord with the lyre. Make melody to him with the harp of 10 strings. Sing to him a new song. Play skillfully on the strings with loud shouts." In 1 Corinthians 10:31, more on the work side of things and life side of things. "So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all for the glory of God." These things are fully realized and appreciated whenever they are directed back towards God. So in preparing this, I kind of had this idea, okay, I can hear, or let's do this. Looking at a painting, we might look at two different paintings and say, okay, this one is beautiful, and this one's beautiful, and they're both reflective of the God-given nature and of creativity and the God-given creative ability. But one artist might have painted that painting in order to glorify God, and the other might have painted that painting to glorify himself. There's no way that we can experience or that we can tell which is which, maybe, unless the content of the painting is changed. But what I do believe that we can tell whenever we are the artist, right, whenever we are the one creating the work, carrying out the expression, is that exchange between you and God is absolutely realized. I might paint a painting for the glory of myself and gain nothing out of it, but I might paint a painting for the glory of God and gain everything out of it. That's a funny example because I can't paint. I'll use music, and you can use whatever you consider as your act of worship. I can play a song on piano for my own glory, and I won't gain much out of that. Or I can get up on stage on Sunday and play piano for the glory of God, leading others to glorify him too. That is so much more eternally rewarding to me than anything that I can do to glorify myself. So the direction and the purpose of our creativity is fully realized, or the value of it is fully realized only whenever it is directed towards God, our Creator. So I hope you were able to at least see some of these attributes. Each one of us here, whether you think you're a creative being or not, you are created to be creative. You are created to express yourself creatively through some manner. I can't tell you what that is today, but I think you have a good idea of that. What I want to bring this home with, what I want to conclude with, is just this question that I think we have a hard time answering sometimes. How do you worship God in your personal life? I think a lot of people that attend church on Sundays would go initially to say, I worship God in my personal life on Sundays when I sing worship songs, or I worship God in my personal life when I pray at prayer gathering. And I think those are absolutely acts of worship. Those are absolutely valuable acts of worship. But I want to challenge you to consider, what do you do privately in your personal life as an act of worship? Not the lifestyle of worship. I hope that you're living out the lifestyle of worship and doing all of these other spiritual disciplines. But what acts of worship are you carrying out in your own life? This definition I want to give you today of what an act of worship is. An act of worship is a creative expression of our emotions, values, and beliefs that glorify God. Our acts of worship are a creative expression of our emotions, values, and beliefs that glorify God. We all have emotions that we need to express. We all have values and beliefs that we need to express. And we, of course, express those through words and conversation every day. But I want to challenge you and push you to express that in some creative manner. Whether that's picking up a sketchbook and a pencil and trying to sketch out something in order to glorify God and express yourself through that, that might be a good practice to bring yourself back into just another manner of worshiping God, right? Or in some way sharing that with others, making music for God, writing blog posts so that others can be led to God, or simply carrying out your work faithfully and excellently to glorify God. So 2 things with this, what this looks like practically. If you are more on the side of, Patrick, I am not artistic, I cannot carry out, I'm not artsy at all, I can't draw, I can't play music, this is still for you. You have some profession, you have some trade or craft that you carry out in your life. So some challenging things with this that I want to challenge you with is approach your daily work with a frequently renewed vigor and passion through which you glorify God. Right? Every day you wake up to work, don't see it as just, oh, I have to go to work for another 8 hours, this is going to kill me. Approach it with a vigor and passion to say, no, I'm going to do this excellently in order to glorify God with the ability that I've been given. Or for you students, if you're going to school for another 6 hours, you can approach it begrudgingly and just hate everything about it, or you can wake up and say, no, I'm going to glorify God through the passion that I have for education, through the ability that He has given me to express myself through education. Consider how you are able to express your relationship with your Creator, your creative being, through the excellence of the way that you execute your work. And for those of you, I want to challenge all of you in this, whether you are artsy or not, embrace some level of art. I think this is a gift that God has given us to creatively express ourselves in some way that you might be able to gain from. So use your artistic skill or your creative skill to as a practice discipline to creatively express your emotions, values, and belief in a God-glorifying way. Consider, okay, I'm doing this, but what can I do? What can I do with my music, or what can I do with my craft that might glorify God more, or that might bring my heart in a position to where I can glorify God through that action? Appreciate art as a reflection of God's own creative nature. I think that we can listen to music or look at paintings or look at other forms of art and appreciate just the fact that God has given that person the creative ability, and that is some manner of God's creation in us, and we can worship God through that. And then simply just appreciate God's creative nature, right? This is maybe the easiest one for all of us to do in order to worship God, especially with it warming up outside. Get outside, go on a hike, sit by a lake, walk with a friend through the woods, and just recognize the fact that His creative nature is all around us, and He is the same God that has created everything that we see, has also imprinted on us His very image in us, right? So these are just so many ways of worship, and I hope this is a different approach to what worship is. Of course, we know what worship is with a true life of worship, right? John 4, the John 4 passage that we read today, we need to worship God in spirit and truth, and yes, that happens with our entire life, but maybe there's something more specific to these acts of worship that we can intentionally carry out from our day-to-day life. It might be out of your comfort zone, it might be right in your comfort zone, but I want to challenge you to carry this out in a manner of worshiping God in a new way. Sing to the Lord a new song, sing to Him with shouts of praise. Thank you, church. Lord, we praise you. We praise you because you are worthy. It would be vain to worship you. It would be vain to direct our worship towards you if there was no reason to it. But Lord, what we are looking at this week through Palm Sunday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday, Lord, you have every reason to be worshiped. So, Lord, I ask you that as we look back on these last 10 disciplines, all of these habits and these practices, these things that we can carry out, Lord, would you remind us of those in the coming months and even the coming years? Would you remind us of some of the things that you've taught us these past 2 months and how to align our lives in a Godward-oriented direction? And Lord, specifically with worship, whatever acts of worship, first off, I thank you that you've given us a creative nature. You've made us into interesting beings and interesting creatures. I pray that we can embrace that, not for our own glory, but that we can embrace that for the glory of the God who gave us that. Let us reflect everything back to you through our music, through our arts and crafts, through our work, through our professions, through our trades. Lord, would you be glorified immensely in our congregation, in the acts of worship that we carry out in our daily lives, Lord. So we thank you. We praise you. You are Hosanna. You are King. And we worship you today and pray these things in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.